Hi Disruptors, welcome back to our From Zero to Hero video series. My name is Francisco and today we are going to carry on talking about interface, namely blocks and events in Outsystems. This is the second video of interface in Outsystems. In our previous video, we covered the interface tab. On this one, we are going to take a closer look at blocks and events and how to apply the concepts that we spoke on the other video. Let's get started. Let's dive right into Outsystems. In Service Studio, go to the module you previously created and click on the Interface tab. Now, moving on to the main focus of our videos, blocks and events. What is a block? A block is a reusable interface component and they are developed just like screens. We talked about them on the previous video. So, they follow a life cycle that are composed by a set of stages. They can have input parameters, variables, client actions, aggregates, and data actions, also, and last but not least, events. On the previous videos, we have talked about variables and input variables on logic. They work the same way with blocks. Imagine that your block is your action. When you are using it on your code, you can set the input variable value. Client actions is logic that runs on the block and can be whatever you develop it to be. For it to run, you only need to set its trigger, which can be a button, a link, another action, a click on elements. There's a lot of possibilities that you can do to discover. Aggregates are our way of fetching the data that is stored on our entities. We just say the sources of data that we want to get, set the filters if it's needed, set sorting also if it's needed, and that's it. This is what we call a query. After you set your aggregate and publish a preview of your data is displayed, which helps you build your query and check that you are fetching the data that you want to. Data actions are also a way of fetching data, but they are not constrained to only use aggregates. If you want, you can also use other actions such as APIs. In the action flow, you can fetch the data that you want regardless of its source. You just need to ensure that you have outputs and that you are assigning the data to those output variables. And at last, we have events. Events are like a notification that something has happened. We can either react to an event, this is done by creating handlers of that event, or trigger an event. We can create our custom events or use the Outsystems built-in events of a block. If we want to use built-in events, you will see that an action is automatically generated. This is the handler of that event and it will run when that event happens. The built-in events follow the lifecycle of the block, which is on initialize, so it occurs before the block is rendered and can be used to set its default data, such as assigning a variable based on the inputs. Keeping it simple and avoid slow actions such as local storage operations since it may delay the rendering of the block. OnReady occurs after the block has initialized and is ready to render but hasn't started to. Also, keep this action simple. This event is useful when we want to set a focus on an input widget or add JavaScript listeners to our block. Or in another case, initialize a third-party component that needs the DOM. OnRender occurs right after the OnReady event handler and every time the data of a block changes. You can use it to update some third-party components such as a progress bar. OnParameters changed occurs anytime the parent of our block changes one of its inputs. Changes to the input value inside the block does not trigger this event handler. You can use it to react to changes and refresh an aggregate or data action that depends on that input parameter, or recalculate a variable that depends on the same input parameter for this instance. Then we have onDestroy, which occurs right before destroying a block. You can use it to implement logic when the component is disposed, such as to remove event listeners. If we build custom events, then it will show as an event of our block. This means that when we use our block, we can have a handler for this event. If we must have it or not depends on the mandatory property of the event. If set to true, then when we try to use the block, it gives an error until you set up a handler for it. If set to false, then no error is created since this is not a mandatory event. For example, if I create a dummy screen and a test block, the dummy screen is the parent of the block and is up to the dummy screen to handle the block's events. Events can even have input parameters. This allows us to send information to the parent of that block. This is very useful when you have inputs inside your block and you want to let the parent know the value that the user inserted on that input, for example. Shall we get our hands dirty? Let's go. Let's start by creating a blocks flow. This will help us later on to split our app according to the best architecture practices. Just right-click on the UI flows folder and select Add UI Flow. You're going to name this one Blocks, right-click on it and select Add Block. Let's call this block Product Detail. The first thing to set is if there is any input variable for the block. Since this block will display the information of a given product, you need to have this product ID as an input variable. In order to do that, we right-click on the block and add an input variable, naming it Product ID. And notice that the default data type is automatically set. After the input creation, you'll need to retrieve the product with the matching input product ID. For that, we right-click on the block and choose the option Fetch Data from Database. Here, we'll be redirected to the Aggregate Editor window, where we can pick the data entity sources. This can be done by searching for the entity product on the editor's header and clicking on Get Data button. Another simple way to do this is just by dragging the product entity from the Data tab to this main section. Still, on the Sources tab, you will add the supplier entity and check that there will be a join automatically created with the product supplier. This happened because the platform recognized that we have a foreign key and the join would be created in order to get the supplier from the product. Keeping in mind that this block has the purpose of displaying the product detail, you should add a filter by product identifier on the aggregate. This can be done by navigating to the Filters tab on the editor and adding a filter matching product identifier with the input variable. At this stage, we have set correctly the aggregator and we can close the editor. Noticing that this aggregator will always retrieve a record, at least one, you should set the aggregator property max records to 1. This is a hero tip. Now we need to build the block in order to display the attributes from the product, which will be product name and description, the new attributes that we just added to the entity. This will identify the product and details its information. Then we have product stock. This one holds the number of the current product's available units. We also have product supplier, which will be fetched due to the join created in the aggregate between product and supplier entity. By double-clicking in the block, we go to the interface, where we can add multiple widgets from the left sidebar. This will be the content displayed on the block. Start by dragging the expression widget builder for the block and giving it product name value. Do the same for the other 3 values from the aggregate. When developing blocks content, try to explore different widgets, understand each one of them, and figure out what would be the best fit for the case. After that, the block is created and we can drag it to any screen to be used. One of the good things about blocks is that if you change your block, everywhere it is used will be updated after you refresh your dependencies. The point is, you can imagine how useful this can be. It promotes code reusability, avoids duplicated code, is more efficient, and reduces a lot of maintenance work. In fact, they are so good that if you take a careful look at the out-of-the-box components developed by Outsystems on your module, you can see that almost everything is made out of blocks. The layout of your screen is a block, so you don't have to set it up on each page. The columns, user avatar, buttons, they have developed it once and you can reuse it everywhere. If we have an issue with them, we just fix the block and everything and everywhere it is used will be fixed. No needing for you to go to all the buttons and make changes that you want for your code. That is all for today's video. When we take on the last challenge of the From Zero to Hero series, we will put this knowledge to the test. Don't forget to follow us on social media, subscribe to the channel for all our updates, and feel free to comment with any doubts. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.